1992 into the family business as a temporary job. I moved to Florida, was engaged to Michael, one of the siblings in the business, and had a background in human resources, went to college for human resource management, organizational behavior, was working for the largest veterinary hospital in the nation in New York City, met him, he proposed on the second date, I moved to Florida. And they needed help in human resources in the business, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was interviewing at insurance companies and for all different types of institutions in a human resource capacity, and somehow my 3-month temporary job is now over 32 years. I started on the phones, learning the business. Being on the phones, I actually think I've always tried to recommend, there's members of management that have not been on the phones, people that didn't start in that capacity. I find it very insightful though, for anyone, even for somebody to just spend a certain number of hours just shadowing somebody and really seeing what they're experiencing, because it's a very tough job. And when you're the agent, you're constantly, like you talk about, like, what's it like to be a collections agent? What's it like to be on the other side of a call line where somebody's frustrated, or they're calling a doctor's office, their kid is sick and nobody's calling them back? Or during COVID, we took lots of calls. Imagine the stress level the country was going through, and we're on the other side of that phone line. But when I started, we were still taking messages on paper, punching the old clock that clicked when you stuck your paper in it. It was a little different then. But it is insightful. I understand, what it's like when clients call in and say who's on call, what you do with that information, the complexity of making sure that's right, how that could upset a client, how that could upset an agent. They moved me into payroll, and then eventually the business grew. I'm trying to think back, 32 years ago, because the business is around 50 years, we had substantially smaller number of employees. I mean, it was a much smaller business. We had a small footprint in a building, which is a building we now own, but there were, tenants all over the building. Human resources, the family's like, the answering service doesn't need human resources. The manager does the human resources. But as the business grew, and the call center part of the business grew into its own separate business, and the answering service grew into its own, it still needed somebody to manage the HR. And as you grow, and we grew to almost 2,000 people, I was responsible for all of the human resources for all of the businesses. Been involved in pretty much all aspects of human resources, whether it be the benefit administration, the selection, the enrollments, the compliance parts of it, dealing with facing a challenge where we found out we didn't know something, and I find that out all the time. There's some new thing, nobody told me about it, maybe we're in a new state and we weren't aware that there was a statutory change, or we got misinformation from the payroll company, or a manager did something that we weren't aware of and put us out of compliance, or in sales. But I've done sales over the years. I've been involved in all aspects of the business from a board perspective. I mean, the one thing that we've done a little differently is we were in the answering service business, the core of this, that's how this business started, my father-in-law, and then my husband actually was involved in the business many, many years ago. A lot of his siblings went off to school, came back, whatever, and so over the years, different family members had been involved. So I shared with you, we sold those businesses in 2019, and my husband and I decided he's not going to retire, we're not going to retire. We'll buy the family out of the answering service business and continue the legacy. At that time, we didn't know we had children that wanted to actually be involved. Our kids all had different career paths. They were in university for different courses of study. But we knew he didn't want to retire, and we were young enough that we weren't going to retire. For the acquisition part, I mean, we are now involved in software for the industry, which we think, years ago, I think my husband may have shared the story, but competitor of ours actually really needed a solution and went to my husband and said, would you be willing to consider selling this to your competition? And we met, said, you know what? It's not going to change the fact that we're still competitors. So they could buy a solution from us, or they could buy a solution from someone else, and maybe it's not exact, we might more intricately understand the industry, so ours might be a little more fine-tuned, or it might be able to offer better solutions just because this is what we've been doing for 50 years. But why not? You know what? We've invested over a decade of investment and R&D in this, and it's very costly. Why not share it, help with that R&D, continue to be able to grow? So we're not just in the answering service. Our path has a number of paths. It's the answering service. It's the software side of things for the industry. And then we have interests in other areas. So the parent company may have different areas that we expand into. This one obviously being a very core part of who we are and a place that we want to remain in. But it's also an evolving industry, so you move with the times. Things change. You have AI, technology changes. So we'll have to be pliable, which we've been in terms of, okay, we added chat, let's say, things that you've done differently over the years that didn't exist 50 years ago. So finding ways to still be needed, and we know we're needed. I laugh actually, thinking that some people still use beepers. When I came into the business, half of what we did in the answering service was dealing with alpha pagers and beepers, and now that's not out there, but it's actually out there a little bit, which is pretty funny actually. I still have one in my drawer actually. But I do see us doing some acquisitions in this space, getting more involved in more customer service oriented projects, but not like what we were in the prior business, not seasonal work. We don't want that for our personal life, and we don't want that for the people. I think that the big challenge in that world, which works for some of these larger call centers, but not for what we want, who we want to be surrounded with, is that peak and valley of hiring large groups, letting large groups go. We don't want that. We like having, and you'll see as you spend more and more time around some of the folks here, we have people here 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, longest employee 46 years. Obviously that's not for everyone, and that's okay. Some people come in and they're a student, or they just need a job for a couple of years, or whatever that looks like, and that's okay as long as when they're here they commit to what they're doing. But there's a lot of long-term personnel who we like that. We don't want to have this, all this transient people in and out. So we do know what we don't want to do, having done it before, but we will probably expand, take on, certain accounts that will be more stable throughout the year, that might have more customer service needs, not necessarily just answering service. So I see us doing more of that. So we've had some hiccups, learned through doing, and things that maybe didn't always go smoothly, but we feel really good about what we've done experience-wise and how much we've learned and how we get better and better at it as we go, I think.